Welcome to this Airwalk Reply podcast, The Big Questions in Tech, with your host, Alex Hammond, and security consultants, Costas, Kourmpoglou, and Dave Wilson. Together, they answer the big questions on cybersecurity.
Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of The Big Questions in Tech with Airwalk Reply. I'm Alex Hammond, your host. I'm joined today by Costas and Dave from our security practice. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Hello.
So, security, it's probably fair to say it's got a kind of mixed rap in terms of maybe not being the most exciting area, but I think with the CrowdStrike outages, it's probably top of mind for a lot of people in terms of we were just literally talking about, don't swear on camera, but the oh shit moment, I'm going to say it, that an awful lot of organizations have had. So have you kind of guys been watching that and going, well, finally, now's our moment, people are actually going to take us seriously? Or what's your perspective on the last kind of few days of what's happening?
Well, I think we've certainly done a number on the world economy.
Yeah.
Whether we meant
The
to or not.
collective security community is rather...
Absolutely. And I think, the good guys for once took a hit there, unfortunately. But yeah, I think for me, it kind of highlights the issues that we've kind of got with security. We're going deeper and deeper into systems in order to protect them, and that can have ramifications that people and organizations don't actually consider at the time when they buy those software, although they have benefits. But
I guess it also brings to life, whilst it wasn't a cyber attack as such, it was the irony, but it brings to life, like, it's the sort of thing that could quite easily happen as a result of a cyber attack, right? And is it fair to say that there's still this assertion that it's not going to happen to us and it's never going to be that bad, and actually things like this are a timely reminder that the interconnected nature of everything now, it's pretty catastrophic potentially, some of this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The level, I guess, that this attack kind of played out. I guess it wasn't an attack, but if you think about it, that it affected the availability of millions of Windows servers and endpoints, you can kind of see it as an attack, as a kind of massive scale attack. So yeah, the ramifications then, how that happened, I think I don't like the word unprecedented, but I don't think it was really on anyone's playbook, as it was evident that this was a thing that's going to happen.
We've seen it at company levels, haven't we? But I think it's the first time we've seen it at quite that scale, isn't it? It's interesting. I mean, what will be interesting, we'll sort of come on to the kind of main topic of the day shortly, but it'd be interesting to see if it leads to any sort of step change in how seriously people take this stuff at this kind of top level. Yeah. Which kind of brings us on to the main theme of this episode. So we've previously talked on previous episodes about AI and the kind of emerging nature of that, and what ramifications that has, and the transformational nature of that potentially. So kind of looking at it from a technology perspective, we've talked about the real emerging things around what modern function looks like from a technology perspective. So how do you structure, how do you operate, how do you be more agile, all that sort of thing. And we kind of want to cover the security angle of that, really, in terms of what does good look like, what does modern look like for security, and what's a CISO's role, I suppose, and the role of their team. And I mean, we talk about this a lot, right? It's in theory it's evolved quite a bit, but I think what we see is maybe there's different levels of maturity. So I guess let's kick that off. I mean, what are we seeing with our clients, or kind of in the market that that's kind of problematic? Where are we seeing the kind of real problems when it comes to security?
So for me, and what I see is, I think from a security perspective, the positioning of your security team is key to what you want to achieve. Traditionally, the main scenario that we see is that security teams are so far removed from your front end developers or your engineers, and I think that becomes the biggest problem, because you can't protect something if you don't know how the engineers and devs and the front end staff work. And if you're so far to the right when you want to protect the left, you're essentially ruling by decree.
And is that effectively a function of traditional security? It was over here, it was kind of an audit function of sorts, it was we sort of gateway interventions where they go, okay, we're going to audit you now, or we're going to check before you go live, or we're going to review your architecture, and then maybe we'll see you again in 12 months. So that sort of attitude, and quite not passive, but certainly outside of, they're not in the mix. Is that fair? Is that?
Yeah, kind of the attitude of policing, pretty much,
Yeah.
right? And it's evident in the way that kind of Conway's law plays out, right? The organizational structure kind of mimics the software and the outputs that you're going to have. Kind of the team topologies and the positioning is very important.
Yeah.
And if you're not directly involved in this process, then you cannot really build the understanding of the systems,
Yeah.
and you cannot build the empathy effectively of that. So the whole system kind of fails because you don't understand really the problems that people need to face, and you don't understand the system that you need to secure.
Yeah.
So you're coming from the outside and you're trying to impose effectively semi-arbitrary sometimes rules that kind of maybe derive from compliance, maybe they derive from kind of some control catalog that you came up from, and those don't relate to reality. So that major disconnect between what the team actually is doing day to day, what the business is doing day to day in order to build the product versus what the cybersecurity function needs to and kind of protect is there, and that's one of the biggest problems.
How much of that, you guys have worked in the security functions within kind of client organizations, how much of that is driven by, I don't know, incentivization or kind of a mindset, the role that security think that they're there to play, which is, as you say, about protecting? And I mean, the easiest way to protect from a security perspective is to say no, you can't do it. If we don't do anything, it'll be really secure. But obviously, as a business or an organization, that isn't. How much of it is driven by that, do you think?
So I'm a big proponent of cybersecurity teams should very rarely, if ever, say no to something, and by that I mean there's always a way to do something, and if you can deliver a solution that achieves security based on your risk appetite for an organization, that actually allows an engineering team to move forward. Because engineering teams are your breadwinners, if you think about it. They drive the features which ultimately organizations profit from.
Yeah.
And if we deny their ability to deliver, then security will essentially become antagonistic towards profit.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to profit.
And I guess that's the inevitable friction for security teams, I suppose, is that ultimately if something goes wrong, they're the ones that will get a kicking and say, okay, well, why aren't security on that? But the alternative is that they constantly say no and things like move forward. So it's trying to find that happy balance, I guess, and trying to find an approach, I suppose, to being. We talk a lot about being an enablement function, don't we? Like,
yeah.
How do you make that happen, I suppose?
Yeah. So I think it kind of goes almost back to the positioning where if your incentive is to effectively prevent, for example, number of incidents that take place over a year, your default function is going to be, well, don't make releases, just say no, right? That's going to be your primary incentive. So if you change and you shape your incentives to be product oriented, if you want to, then that's kind of the first step of enabling for cybersecurity to be an enabling function, really.
So let's talk about that, because that's quite fundamental, isn't it? So that product construct is quite important to that, isn't it? So effectively having security a bit more embedded or entirely embedded potentially, is that kind of what we're seeing?
Yeah, that is one of the good paths, effectively, of having cybersecurity being an enabling function, where we take what we learn as we're building a product, we help that product team go through a happy path, evolve in our understanding of how that product works and functions, and then kind of thinking about how we can secure that, kind of going on that journey with them. If we at any point in time kind of try to gatekeep and we try to just say, hi, we're security, we come out of nowhere and hello, we just need to audit you now, just go through that checklist.
Yeah.
That is to benefit of no one really, especially the organization. So that's a primary function of the enablement.
And I think it kind of speaks to the empathy thing as well. You've got to understand what engineers need to deliver. They have timeframes to get a product out, so whether it's a sprint or whether it's a quarter where they have to deliver a function for one of their clients, and it's a bit like the happy path, but we understand that there's certain things we need to do to secure the estate, and engineers will always take the path of least resistance. They will do things that are like as easy as possible. Not they're doing difficult things, but they are repeating actions.
Yeah, and that's an amazing point, because actually following the path of least resistance is a good thing, because it makes your work efficient, right? It makes you deliver more stuff, and that's a good thing. So it's not that we want to avoid that. We want to take engineers, developers, or the product team out of that path. We want to just make sure that we're protecting that least resistance path in a better way. And adding to that, the really important point is that when cybersecurity thinks that they know better how a product functions or how they want to secure that product, instead of the product team kind of going in with that assumption that those guys don't know security, we do. We're going to come in and we're going to solve that problem. That is also kind of goes back to the empathy, very problematic.
Is that a big principle then of the enablement piece, which is how does security make the path of least resistance the most secure path ultimately? So I guess that pattern-based approach and being able to, here's one we did earlier, I guess is the principle ultimately the same, but this is secure, and so path of least resistance is also the best path, so use that one and everybody be happy. Do we see that enough, do you think? Do we see enough organizations doing that?
I think certainly you were involved in one of our clients who kind of went down that path, and a pattern isn't necessarily always secure, but if you see something that a product team does, the likelihood is that the next product team will also want to do that, whether that's kind of like, how do we set out an S3 bucket to do something within the AWS or receive files. Like, that we've built that before.
Yep.
So let's take that, whether it be in Terraform or some sort of infrastructure as code, and put it in a repository somewhere that can then just be consumed by your engineering team. So then that they're doing it the same way every time.
Yeah.
That mentality change of effectively trying to start from what problem is the product team trying to solve, and how can we make that problem effectively be solved securely, versus going in with a clipboard with a checklist is the major kind of mental shift that most cybersecurity functions don't go.
And we touched on it a little bit in the AI episodes, which is it's the same principle for enabling AI services, and we did a lot of work in that in the kind of early days of cloud as well. Is how do you enable these services at scale in a kind of rapid, safe approach? It's about getting ahead of it, and I think that's where we're seeing the most maturity, I think, in all of it really, but particularly in terms of how security can play a role is in that, I think, isn't it? So one of the things that we hear a lot about, and I think we talk a lot about, is that concept of shifting left, and I guess being a quite a powerful approach to thinking about how do you become more embedded, how do you get more involved early, all that sort of stuff. But it's not always that simple, I suppose. Let's talk a little bit about shift left and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I think the problem now these days with shift left is that we are effectively gathering all of our security properties, all of our requirements, and we're kind of checking them over the fence on the left side of that process. So we're putting a lot of weight into the engineers and the development in those first stages, thinking that we're kind of almost gonna sprinkle a bit of magic dust and we're gonna help that, and that might be a bit controversial. But it's starting to become evident that although it's definitely a better approach than to consider security all the way towards the end of a project, it's definitely not the panacea that we're thinking it is.
And what's the shortcoming there? Is that a skills thing, or just the engineers have got enough to worry about, or what's the shortcoming?
Because everything is kind of moving towards that kind of as code piece, and just because an engineer can do something doesn't mean they should do something.
Okay.
So if you load up your engineers onto functional testing, unit testing, security testing, and give them absolutely no context out of just here's a score based on the security tool that the security team decided to implement in the pipeline, it means nothing to them. And if it means nothing to them, and that's not, they obviously care, but you start the process of them having to say, I need to build this product, and the pipeline in the build is failing, and that's it. You have to give them context in order to move things forward.
So I guess what does good look like? How do you shift left without kind of overburdening engineers and kind of giving them distractions like that? What are we seeing as best practice, I suppose, to use that term?
So I again, a bit like positioning, shift your people left. Don't necessarily just shift the controls left.
Okay.
And that would be my main takeaway. You can't, if security teams are over here with a control or a security tool that they're just writing controls based on a framework like NIST or whatever, pick an acronym, and they write controls that might not be meaningful to the product that the engineers are trying to build, then you're just creating conflict.
So effectively, security, get your hands dirty. Is kind
Yes,
of what we're
it
saying.
does.
Like,
Yeah,
be
exactly.
part of it. Come back to that enablement piece. Actually, get your hands dirty. Get involved. Be part of that team. It isn't throwing rocks at engineers and asking them why they're not doing better. It's actually helping make it happen.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And the kind of the other side of that, the where it's moving, is around kind of the platform engineering, where we have a platform. That platform contains the happy paths, and we're again close to the product teams to understand that this is the path that they want to take. This is the path that enables them.
Yeah.
And so instead of kind of giving them arbitrary scores and saying, well, you've got a 10.3 there or a 6.5, and I don't know what that means, but you need to fix it.
Right.
We kind of take care on those kind of foundational problems that they really don't have to think about. It's a good thing to basically give people less things to worry about.
And I think just to add to that, you can have a score of 7.8, just to pick one out of the clouds, but that might not be a high score to the product you're building. So it's the context that you give it.
Sure.
Log4j is a big one. But if that application that is running that service, it's so far deep into my estate and it's not public and it's annoying, but it's still going to report a high score, and you're then just adding work onto your engineers to go and fix that because the build won't pass until.
Context is king always.
So if we take that kind of philosophy, okay, we want security to be more embedded, get their hands dirty. They need to be bringing the right skills and knowledge to the party to do that. And I think we've talked historically about there being something of a systematic, potentially de-skilling of security in some instances, in some enterprises, whether that's offshoring a SOC and making it kind of lower cost, more junior individuals monitoring logs, all that sort of stuff, but a slightly more hands-off approach, and then that kind of audit, punctuating with audits and that sort of thing. That model is different now, isn't it? It's certainly in the ultimate manifestation of what we're talking about, being more embedded. But that requires a different skill set, potentially a different type of image. Like, is that something that we're seeing being a problem? Is that are companies kind of where they need to be in that respect, or is that something that is a risk?
I think. Yeah, to build that context and to be relevant to the product team, you need to have the specializations and you have the depth of that knowledge to help enable that. So you need to have, if you're building infrastructure in the cloud, if you're trying to secure a Gen AI kind of solution, if you want to dive deep into whatever kind of technology stack, you need to be relevant to that. You need to understand the foundations of that. You need to be knowledgeable on that, and you're effectively needed to be wearing a security hat.
Yeah.
So yes, the depth and the breadth that we're dealing with in terms of the cybersecurity skills that people need to have has definitely exploded over the last, I guess, couple of years.
Is that possible? Like what you've just described there suggests that this, if we move to a product model where you've got, whether it's a dedicated security resource or certainly a more embedded security resource that ultimately has to know how to secure every component and technology that our product team is using, which could be pretty vast, couldn't it? Is that feasible? Is that, or actually is it a model where, I don't know, is it a centre of excellence model where actually you've got cloud security, I don't know if AI security is really a thing yet, but like different specialisms that can be brought to bear in that sort of way? Is that the model?
I think so. I think that's maybe one reason why we talked about CISOs kind of like burning out, is they have such a wide range of topics to kind of secure under the remit of a CISO within the organization. So whether that's kind of cryptography all the way down to application security. So I think for me, from a skills perspective, it's upskilling your engineers. So if you have an application developer, he might be interested in security. Most people are, or they might say they are, and it's kind of maybe that center of excellence thing where you can say, have you considered taking a role into security, and then having that for every 5 application developers have a security or application security,
Right.
and that
Okay.
rather than having a security team that thinks they know everything, and it's just impossible. There's too much.
Yeah. Sure.
And that's a problem really there that you kind of highlighted with scale. So you can have cybersecurity functions that tries to almost linearly scale with how the business does that, right? So you can't embed a security engineer next to every single pod or value stream or whatever. There's a fine balance there between kind of what we talked about, the platform engineering and kind of providing those happy paths, having security champions programs, and building the right incentives really for the product team.
So it's really, as with all these things, it's never quite as simple as it might appear on first glances, but it's really a combination of those factors, isn't it? If you're creating a happy path that is kind of secure by design, consumable patterns that are secure inherently, you are shifting left, but in a way that isn't throwing rocks. It's supporting, but it's also then there is going to always be a level of what fundamentally we are saying that the engineering teams and the developers do need to have security as a much greater part of what they're doing than maybe historically, but maybe not go as far as saying, right, it's all on you, best of luck, and you've got a 4.0 score and sort it out. It's trying to find a happy medium, I suppose. Right?
Exactly. And when cybersecurity teams tend to fail is that they never cater for that feedback loop for the product or for the business, where they kind of become isolated into their compliance, into their audit engagements, and they don't kind of keep their ear close to the business.
We're seeing that with one or two of our clients at the moment, where actually what shifts that is that exec sponsorship to say, this is about moving more quickly. This is about, one of our clients coined the phrase, I would suggest, but that rapid safe change approach, which is like slow safe change, is anti-competitive. Ultimately, it's probably not going to move the needle. It's not going to maintain competitive advantage. It's not going to allow you, if you're a public sector organization, it's not about profit, but it's being able to react to things and evolve quickly and give kind of citizens what they need. But moving quickly is the order of the day now, isn't it? So doing that in a safe way, but the clue is the rapid bit. It has to be accelerated change. So if you've got a CIO that is pushing that, then that's kind of fundamental, isn't it? If that impetus isn't there, it's probably a bit harder, isn't it, I guess?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's another great point around kind of how we're building those processes so that they are efficient to the business and also help us be secure. We're seeing a lot of things where a lot of processes. We're seeing a lot of processes where they have gatekeeping, where we have unnecessary checks, where there's a delay. So because there's not a good understanding of what we're actually trying to achieve, and these are fundamental hits to the business itself in terms of their function.
Yeah.
And I think the issue with kind of security is around they are given the task of compliance, which is possibly not the right thing to do from a security function. Compliance is a major part, but I think we've talked about it before, is they're almost kind of should be, in my opinion, separate entities. Compliance is pushed by an organization because it's essentially a legal defense. But if you're compliant, it doesn't necessarily mean you're secure, but you can certainly argue from a legal perspective if you are compliant.
There's also there's a perception of compliance in the same way that there's a perception of resilience. For example, we talked about this in other events and podcasts and things before about how operational resilience has become an audit-led, similar to security. Really, I've passed the audit. I don't have to worry about it again until next year. That's great. I can get on with my day job now, as opposed to worrying about, am I actually operationally resilient? Can I actually solve for the things that the regulator's trying to get me to solve for, or am I just getting the regulator comfortable that I can? It's a different thing, right? And security is the same, I would suggest.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective that, because the regulators, especially with things like the DORA Act, they've tried to make DORA to be the exact opposite, effectively, of a checklist exercise. They've tried to make them meaningful in terms of the operational resilience of those teams. What we're actually though seeing, which is is exactly what you said. It's a checklist exercise. And to Dave's point, the fact that we're driving from compliance, where compliance is really a byproduct of good security engineering, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. It's trying to flip it slightly, isn't it? Which is going to be hard because ultimately the risk aversion and the kind of historical nature of how regulation works, it is different, isn't it? But if you do what you can to and can say hand on heart, we are a resilient organisation, you'll be compliant.
Yeah,
as opposed to the other way around, which is how do we make ourselves look compliant, and then maybe we'll do what the minimal here. It's the wrong way to do it, isn't it?
And to the happy path side, if you make your happy path compliant, then you are, by definition, compliant because you're sending everyone down the right path.
And that's a great point again there, because organizations are always going to try to do the absolute minimum required to meet regulatory compliance. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but when we talk about operational resilience, ultimately when that fails, your business fails.
I was going to say it's trying to it's a business imperative, right?
Exactly.
Being secure and being resilient is a business imperative. It's not a regulatory imperative. It is a regulatory imperative because if you don't, you get a kicking. But surely it's more important, that your customers can access their money or
your business
whatever
functions.
It might be, your business functions. Yeah. So it's. But I think we're starting to see that mindset shift. But that's I think seems to be the last thing to go. Actually, I think technology, ironically, seems to be driving that whole way of thinking more so than I think the risk teams and the compliance teams, I would suggest. And security, I guess, are stuck in the middle somewhere, and some of them are more evolved and more mature, and some of them are still kind of in that kind of compliance camp, aren't they?
Yeah. The connection effectively now that starts to get established, which needs to, is for most organizations, is that business function is built on top of a bunch of technology.
Yeah.
How do we differentiate between those? Does it matter if we differentiate between those? Because if that technology function goes, then so does our business function. Can we decouple them? That's part of the whole story there.
And I think that's a bit of a debate around. I think we were talking about the difference between the kind of UK regulations and DORA at a recent event, weren't we? And how the difference between a business critical system and an IT system, or your business and a third party that's providing a business service versus an IT service, and it's a bit of a weird debate, really, because how are they not one and the same? Like, there's not much you can do in a modern FSI that isn't based on technology.
And you can't really do anything without information. Is kind of one, and there's a recent blog that we put out around, is it data vaults, and the information is essentially the business, even one layer deeper, like the technology function, the business function, but really it's just the information that your company holds. And if you can meaningfully secure that, then you can or if that is resilient, then you can essentially continue to operate. You might take a little bit of time to come back up, but for me, it's the information resilience is probably even one to focus on, I think.
Absolutely.
On the resilience piece, there is definitely a theme in cybersecurity where we are trying to prevent more than trying to build resilient systems. We're not trying to think about the assumed breach. We're not trying to think about an event is going to happen and how do we effectively become resilient and how we kind of gracefully accept that change. We see that a lot of the time we're trying to put all of our eggs into the preventative basket, where that's not going to happen, that's not a thing that's going to happen until it does, and then resilience.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to the CrowdStrike thing as well. Like you're not trying to prevent something that you let into your estate, essentially. So the resilience piece is more important than ever, and I think it's been proven.
It's the sort of classic Trojan horse kind of analogy, isn't it? You can build higher and higher walls, but ultimately something's going to get in. So how do you respond to that, and how have you constructed your systems and your structures and everything else to tackle that? Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's fundamental, isn't it? It is inevitable ultimately that something will go wrong.
Yes.
It's how bad does that get, and how quickly can you respond, and what's the ultimate impact, and how do you mitigate all of those things?
Yeah. And understanding a system, the foundation of that is understanding what we call its failure modes. How does it fail? Do we understand how the system operates fundamentally? Because sometimes the assumptions that we have, the mental models that we have about those systems, they're not quite right. This is where kind of one of the critical aspects of the operational resilience plays in testing that operational resilience, understanding how systems can fail when they collapse. What business functions do they take with them?
Yeah.
What assumptions have we made? This is a very difficult and complex process.
I was going to say, and increasingly so, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The ecosystem that makes up a system now. I mean, there's no one system anymore, is it? You're talking hundreds of systems that make up core banking, for example. So what people talk in terms of, our core banking system's down. That's not a thing. It's one component part might be down, but what's the knock-on effect? And do you understand that ecosystem? I would suggest most organizations probably don't understand it that well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. First step of DORA would be mapping effectively your IBS, right? Your important business services.
Yeah.
That is, for a massive organization, a challenge on its own right.
Yeah.
And that effectively plays into, well, if we cannot isolate that component that gives us the critical function of our organization, and we can map its dependencies, then how can we even understand when one of those components fails?
Yeah, and I think as cloud estates and on-prem, well, not so much on-prem, but cloud estates, they ever expand, that inventory piece of what is actually in my estate is super important, because again, you can't, if you don't know what's actually a key component to your entire service, then and it goes down, and you don't know it actually exists, then it's like,
but that's what gets really hard, though, isn't it? Because you've got platform as a service providers, SaaS providers, your own cloud environments that are owned by someone else. You've got your hybrid kind of architectures. You've got your on-prem. You've got your outsourced on-prem. Wow. Okay, that's pretty challenging, isn't it? So that's for me, I suppose. It'd be interesting to see if you agree. For me, like, that almost gets too complex. You have to just focus on the foundations. Like, get the foundations right and build upon those. If you haven't got those right, well, then you've got no chance anyway, have you? So
yeah. Kind of a collective kind of ground up approach to understanding the complexity of the system is a very good start there. Counterintuitively enough, we build a lot more complex systems, I guess, almost by the nature of cloud, because it enables us to build those complex systems that do all of those amazing things a lot easier. And the cloud providers give us all the tooling to understand those complex systems, but we end up in situations where we don't, because there are underlying kind of fundamentals, as you said, that we don't quite have right.
Thank you, guys. That was great. Well, we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time for Big Questions in Tech. Thank you.
Subscribe now to never miss an episode of the Big Questions in Tech.